Hi, Ms. Blackman here. Today we're going to talk about some domestic issues in the United States after World War II, and we're going to connect those major domestic issues to social effects. These include the GI Bill, Truman's integration policies, McCarthyism, National Interstate and Defense Highways Act, and Brown v. Board of Education. Okay, so first, let's start with the GI Bill of Rights. So, all of these soldiers were returning after World War II, and they needed to re enter the workforce. So, they didn't want another issue like U.S. experienced after World War I, where these soldiers came back with this disillusionment and it kind of changed the culture of the United States. So, and then following that, you had this great amount of spending, but then the Great Depression happens. And so the GI Bill of Rights was passed by Congress after World War II to protect and reward returning servicemen. So a lot of these men had left their homes, had left their jobs to fight in the war. And so they're given this GI Bill of Rights when they return. And this GI Bill of Rights includes low interest loans for homes. So that way they can come home to the United States, buy a new home. They're encouraged to do so with low interest rates, and also low interest rates for starting new businesses. Financial grants were also given to soldiers returning, so that way they could attend college. So the financial investment in returning soldiers stemmed a potential post-war unemployment crisis. So instead of having unemployment after World War II, you have all of these soldiers buying houses, starting new businesses, and going to college. So increased consumer demand became the driving force in the post-war economy, and the GI Bill really helped to foster this increased consumer demand. Because soldiers could get low interest rates for houses, they began buying houses, and suburbs started to form. So suburbs are these so-called kit homes, meaning that they applied the techniques of mass production to home building. So instead of homes being custom built, you built lots of homes using the same materials for each one that were mass produced. So everything was pre-measured. Homes could go up fairly quickly. And when people start moving into these convenient homes that have modern conveniences, such as maybe a washing machine, then in low maintenance yards, then you have people forming families and wanting to buy a lot of things that go along with that. And car culture. So the rise of suburbs means people are living further from their jobs, meaning they need transportation. 1950, 59% of families owned a car. By 1955, this number jumped to 70% of families owning a car. 1954, Eisenhower, who was president, called for Congress to take action to improve the nation's highways. Congress passed the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act. Now, this called for the expansion of a network of interstate highways, with the construction to be paid for by an increase in federal tax on gasolines. People are paying more for their gasoline, and that's where the money comes from for the federal government to build these highways. There was also another reason that Eisenhower created highways. It wasn't just for the development of suburbs and housing and things like that, but it was also because Eisenhower was a military man. Remember that he helped orchestrate D-Day. So he created this system of highways for strategic transportation of troops and supplies in case there needed to be evacuation, because remember, the Cold War is going on right now, and both the U.S. and the USSR are developing nuclear weapons. So the Interstate Highway Act improved the nation's ability to move military defenses more efficiently, and it forever changed population patterns and allowed for the growth of United States suburbia, meaning suburbs. All right, so the Cold War is going on right now, and there is this fear of communism. There are 100,000 people in the U.S. Communist Party, and some fear that they may be loyal to the USSR. So the House of Un-American Activities Committee is created, and it investigates communist ties and communist influence in the movie industry, because people believe that the movie industry was what drove and created American culture during this time. Everybody wanted to look like and be like all of the actors and actresses they saw on TV, and everybody's watching the same movies because there aren't a lot of them created like there are today. Senator Joseph McCarthy was a strong anti-communist activist, and he led a communist witch hunt. And it's said that he did this for attention because he needed an issue to win re-election. So he was attacking suspected communists without any evidence. And finally, in 1954, he lost legitimacy. McCarthy was known for drinking a lot, and he ended up accusing members of the U.S. Army. There was televised hearings of these accusations of them being communists, and this showed him being a bully to witnesses. He lost public support, and Senate condemned him for improper conduct. But the communist witch hunt did have a huge impact on America. People were scared to be different. Millions of people took loyalty oaths, and there was this fear of speaking out on public issues during the 1950s. And you get this idea of conformity where everybody wants to be the same. Nobody wants to stand out. And the 1950s were really marked by that conformity in society. All right, let's look at Truman when he was president and how he integrated the military. So segregation was a huge social issue in the late 1940s and early 1950s. Remember, Truman took office as president after FDR died right as World War II was ending. In July 1948, Truman signed an executive order ending segregation of the armed forces. This did not fully take effect until the Korean War in 1950, but there are 3 reasons why the integration of the military took place. Segregation, for one, undercut U.S. morale stature during the Cold War. And also, there was a need to reduce racial tension in the military. And they thought by integrating that would reduce this tension. And significant manpower was needed because of the Korean War. So you needed a lot of soldiers, no matter what race they were, to fight in the Korean War. So integration helped to break down stereotypes. When people are together, they learn that, hey, they're pretty much, people. People are people. And so as the civil rights movement intensified in the 1950s, Americans began to develop relationships with other races. And so you see a lot of coming together of white and black people in America. Brown versus Board of Education definitely helps in this area. Remember that Plessy versus Ferguson was a court case that ruled that segregation was legal and totally okay as long as separate facilities were equal. And they weren't equal. And Brown versus Board of Education proves that they weren't equal. So in the 1950s, the NAACP began to focus on fighting segregation in public education. Many African American children had been placed in shabby, overcrowded, black-only schools with poor funding. So schools were not equal. They were very much separate, but as you can see in these pictures, they're very much not equal. So the NAACP organized a series of lawsuits hoping to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson and demand an integrated school. Thurgood Marshall led the argument before the Supreme Court, in which he presented evidence that schools were far from equal. He also cited psychological studies suggesting that segregation caused African American children to feel unequal and socially inferior. The Supreme Court reached a unanimous decision in which Chief Justice Earl Warren declared that it was unconstitutional to separate public schools on the basis of race. And so you see that schools actually had a hard time integrating. It wasn't easy for anyone. The people that came into the schools to integrate, and for example, Little Rock 9, you have 9 African American students entering Little Rock Central High School. They were bullied beyond belief by the other students that went to that school. And so integration was a long process that there was massive resistance at first